I'd like to welcome each of you to our City Council workshop this Thursday, August the 19th. I'll call this workshop to order, and we'll begin with our roll call. Madam Clerk.
Mayor Blackwell.
I'm here.
Deputy Mayor Trace.
Here.
Councilmember Matheny. Councilmember Askew.
Here.
The first item on our agenda is a discussion regarding Metro Forecasting Interactive Growth Model. Veronica Miller, our Deputy City Manager, will come and introduce our speaker today.
Mayor?
Yes.
Would it be possible just to add, kind of throw something in here just before we get rocking and rolling?
Absolutely.
Just a real quick history, and I appreciate you letting me speak here. I've been touring a lot of the septic facilities, including our own, basically the poopy plant. And the reason I was doing that is to try to get some good data to figure out when we asked to not bring the leachate in, and we all agreed to that. And at the time, we were going through some scary moments of coal ash and some other things. So it just dawned on me to I would like to get some more data in it. And we tried it at that point. So I toured yesterday Toho his plant, and thanks to Todd Swindle, gave me a nice little tour along with his staff. And of course, our own plant we toured. I did some research with EPA and some other things, and talked to as many people as I could talk to. And what I came to realize is that the leachate is really not the problem. Our facility seems to be able to handle it. Toho's facility seems to handle it. And what dawned on me too is even our staff just they said it in a way that was really respectful, but part of it I'm like, we didn't really listen to staff because it's not a problem for us. They actually brought it up. They're like, it would have been nice, if you're an engineer, I'm not going to go against an engineer because I'm not an engineer. They're like, this is what we do. We take pride in it. We really enjoy what we do. When we have a problem, they treat our plant like you treat your stomach. When something goes bad into your stomach or something goes bad into our plant, they have a way to manipulate it and fix it. If there's too much ammonia, they know what to do. So I feel like we made a decision that probably wasn't in the best interest of our citizens, and I think it wasn't in the best interest for ourselves. And I actually feel bad that I voted that way because I think I was scared, and I really wish I could go back and change it, because what's happening now is we're starting to see what the JED is going to do. They don't have a choice but to basically come after the city of St. Cloud. I'm not sure if I can even talk about some of this stuff, but I would love to be able to, find a solution. One of the solutions is that we take the leachate back. They won't come after us or sue us for, I've heard some crazy numbers up to, 10 million, 14 million, possibly 20 million. I would rather take a look at that, try to build back that partnership, because what's happening is we in our plant, it'll eventually make it through and it'll come back to a solid waste. They take that waste and they bring it over to the JED. So I just feel like we didn't research this enough. But of course I would need general consensus, and I wish Ms. Matheny was here, but I would like to relook at it, and that partnership, Toho and leachate, it is not a problem for them whatsoever. And they have a plan in place, and we have a plan in place. This happens in every landfill, in every municipality across the nation. This isn't like we're the only one that takes leachate. It happens everywhere. And if we don't take it, they'll just bring it to someplace else, but it's done correctly. And the EPA stands by it. And the engineers that designed this facility designed it for a way to handle these things. It's just strange to me that I get to make that decision based under everybody that designed this plan of ours, which is actually beautiful. It was my third tour there. Not that I'm that interested in that type of thing, but I think that we as council really need to take a look at it. It's easy to forecast this thing. We know we're heading down to the road where possibly we're going to give up our water. This is the strangest thing. We're going to give up our water, but we're going to be having this pending lawsuit that we'll have to pay for, our citizens will have to pay for, I would rather take a look at this again and go, is this the right thing? They test it before it comes here. It gets tested when it's here. If there's a problem in that process, it's taken care of on one side or the other. EPA would step in and stop it. So if I'm saying something that's wrong, it's what I was told. And going to these facilities, especially Toho's, it's a huge facility. They explain through the process of how this all happens. I really think as council, not to put this burden of this giant bill onto our citizens. It'll happen in a number of different ways. It could happen on their bill. We can end up paying for it. They can go into some other lawsuit. It could be paid for at the tipping station. They could start changing our rates. I would like, I'm not looking for an answer right now, but if we can think about it, and I'm not sure if we can do anything at this point, but maybe Mr. Manzares could step in, and I appreciate you letting me speak about it.
Well, we obviously can't do anything today,
Right.
So I think, Mr. Askew, if you're trying to seek direction from the city council, whether they want to revisit this item and where you can take formal action, staff can certainly work towards trying to provide the best situation we can so that in the best interest of the city, and then if the council's willing to revisit this decision, work on the potential, obviously, reinstitution of the acceptance of the leachate, as well as some sort of resolution strategy for the pending claim by Waste Connections in this instance.
Well, I wasn't expecting that speech, but I certainly like it.
Sorry.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head. I definitely think we probably should take the same tour that you took, and we certainly need to sit down and take another look at that issue, and because I think you're right on track. So it certainly would have my support.
And I don't think that we voted wrong. I think we voted that we were scared, just like the coal ash thing was in the hot topic at the time, and I get it. But looking back in retrospect, I think we could still take care of this, or we don't take care of it, and then we're just going to have to flip the bill to our citizens, and that's something I don't want to do, especially heading out to leave out of office. I don't want to leave somebody with a giant bill.
And I didn't want us to converse about this if it's pending litigation, but I agree that decision was made without all the facts out there, but it was an emergency type decision, which is why we took action when we did, how we did, when we did.
Right.
And throughout this process, I believe city staff has been meeting with the landfill folks to try to come up with a solution. It's just one of those things that it's not the simplest thing in the world.
Right.
But also, I don't think Toho would be fine with that as well, or else they would be taking the leachate over to a Toho facility, not Lakeland. So I don't know if that's the statement that was made about Toho would be fine doing this. I don't know if that's the case because they're sending it to Lakeland.
Right. Just for a fact, they take in leachate all day long. They start at, there's a particular time they can start taking it in, I think 9 or 10 o'clock, and then they'll take it to
After the peak times, they pump it in, right?
Right, but they take it and they charge for it.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I was there for one of the loads. They charged, it was a little over $1,700. What makes them different, though, is they have an actual facility there that's separate from Toho that does their testing for them. So if that's any difference of it, I know we can do testing as well, so.
And that's one of those things, I don't think we were ever set up to properly take in leachate as a service, because one, we weren't charging right for it, because it definitely has a different ERU factor than a gallon coming from a house or a business than a gallon coming super loaded with nutrients, whatever it is, from a different facility. So I honestly think that we just weren't set up properly to do it. I'm sure we can treat it properly because it is a DEP certified facility to treat wastewater and effluent, but maybe that's just something that they end up taking on with their facilities, and we don't as well. But I don't really want to talk about this further if we have pending litigation.
Well, we're not in pending litigation right now, but I think for right now.
Threatened litigation, sorry, because it has definitely been threatened multiple times.
Right.
Sorry.
So what I would, oh yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
So I think, at least for the 3 council members present, you would be interested in at least having some sort of consideration of a change of the city's current course with regard to the leachate, and a possible resolution, if we can negotiate one that staff thinks is appropriate and acceptable to bring back for your consideration. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, but I would still like to have Councilwoman Matheny involved with it as well, because I know she felt really strongly about the leachate coming to the city.
Understood.
But I think if any of us want to do a little bit of research and go to Toho and to our own facility, I think it would open your eyes. And those folks that run those things, that is their pride and joy. They're happy about their oxygen and bacteria, and it's pretty wild. But they know their business, and I think it was just threw everybody off a little bit, is that we pretended like we knew our business, but I agree with Mr. Trace that I think at the time we were very scared of what was going on, and we didn't have all the facts, so we sort of made that emergency decision. But yeah,
I think we got direction. Obviously, you can't make any decisions tonight. It's truthfully, as Mr. Trace pointed out, we have been discussing these issues for a long time for several months, if not years, with Waste Connection since this occurred. There have been ongoing discussions. It's going to take a little bit to get it to a format that we think is presentable but it's going to take a little bit of work to get that way. And of course, there'll be ongoing updates with all the city council members to make sure you're aware of how we're doing. And Ms. Matheny will have the appropriate opportunity to comment during those times if needed.
thank you, Mayor. Sorry.
Any other comment?
No.
Was that item 2 on the agenda?
Sorry.
All right. That brings us back to Ms. Miller, our Deputy City Manager.
Good afternoon, Council. We've had many conversations regarding growth in the city and within the Joint Planning Agreement area. Today, David Farmer and Sarah Kisner with Metro Forecasting Models are going to present the interactive growth model. Before he begins, I'd like to explain the benefits from the Community Development Department perspective. We are going to begin moving forward with our comprehensive plan update that has been requested by our City Council. We are calling Phase 1 this interactive growth model. This will give us an understanding of the growth that we have experienced and understand the timing and location of new growth, as well as how we may divide the JPA into different areas. Because their methodologies are approved by the State Department of Economic Opportunity, we will be able to use their data and analysis as we move forward into Phase 2, updating a full comprehensive plan update and determine our new goals, objectives, and policies to limit the orderly development of our city. So with that, I introduce Mr. Farmer.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Good afternoon.
Good
It's
afternoon.
a pleasure to be here. I've looked at a lot of your aerial photography, studied a lot of your data. I'm happy to talk to you. So, my agenda is almost longer than my slide deck, but so we're going to give you a brief introduction to our company. I'm going to talk about what the interactive growth model is. I'm going to review our methodology and hopefully what sets us apart from other people, including Beaver. The potential uses in St. Cloud, how some of our other clients have used the data that we've provided, and then give you a summary at the end. And there's plenty of time for questions. So I'm here to answer questions and try to make things as clear as possible. So Metro Forecasting Models, we're a group of 5 people. My partner, Dr. Paul Van Buskirk, invented the interactive growth model over a period of 40 years. And it's not patented, because when you patent, you have to tell everyone exactly how all the algorithms work. So what we did is we wrote the 500,000 lines of code that make up the interactive growth model. My partner and I both have, my partner has 40 years experience as a professional engineer. I've got 25. I'm an AICP. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners. So we have been around the block. We understand growth, development, and planning. So what is the IGM? Well, most importantly, it's a growth management planning tool. And all of our government clients that use it have used it well, and we have every government client that we've ever gone to work for. It's used for long-range planning, and maybe from an oblique point of view, helps with budgeting. what are we going to be needing as a municipality? How are things growing outside of our control? How are they going to impact our expenses and our revenues in the city? It's based on multiple data sets. We start with property appraiser data, and then we layer multiple sets on top of that, so we get the most complete picture of really what is going on from a baseline setting. Baseline meaning what is here today and what land is left and what's the quality of that land and what does it mean with its proximity to other uses to make it either more desirable for development or maybe it might take longer to develop. Most importantly, it demonstrates where the development is likely to occur and the densities. All too often, people that do forecasting that's not what they do all day, every day, they tend to take the existing zoning or future land use and they apply those maximums across the land to estimate what the build-out is going to be. And often it's a really, really scary number. And what we do is we tend to look at how you have developed under that same set of zoning and future land uses to try to determine what is in your DNA. How does St. Cloud develop, right? Like let's just say, and I don't know what it is. Let's say your high density multifamily allows 15 units an acre. But let's say if I dug into the data, I found that actually it's 11.2 is what the average of all of your multifamily development. Well, we shouldn't be using 15 because 15 is the upper limit. It could be all 15, but when was the last time that you were able to hit heads every single time when you flipped a coin 5 times in a row, right? It just doesn't happen all the time. So it's important not to get too scared about what the existing zoning allows, but it's important to understand under a reasonable condition exactly what is going to be happening in the city from a growth point of view. So one of the benefits is that this model, we disaggregate a community into a bunch of different areas. We can use any shape you like. We tend to use traffic analysis zones. Why? Well, that happens to line up nicely with the MPO, and you can compare our data to other data, and maybe even use the data in the future when it comes up for your next LRTP, or you're running your own traffic models within the city. When we take the JPA and the city itself, there's 145 traffic analysis zones. So that's pretty disaggregated. And then we model each one of those. And so we're able to assess not just how is one project going to impact, but how are all of these projects collectively, in theory, developing at the same time? How are they collectively going to impact the economy, and where are they going to ripple through in terms of how many school-aged children are they going to generate, how many calls for service might they require, how many gallons are they going to be using of water and generating of wastewater, and so forth. The model data helps you maintain and optimize the highest level of service that you care to achieve. It can also test and does test the outcome of policy changes. What if you were going to increase density or reduce density, or as we've been talking about, the JPA? If we're going to cut out pieces of the JPA, well, what does that mean in terms of reduced available units or additional costs to the city for service for, like, say, fire service or that kind of thing? It also predicts the ideal location and timing of schools, parks, fire stations, and your major shopping centers. And I know, I always get a little bit pushback on the shopping center thing. I know with COVID and Amazon, all those things, I don't know if you saw the news this morning, but it turns out that Amazon is now getting ready to go into retail and build bricks and sticks. So I'm not saying that retail is going to surge back. I think that retail is definitely in a contraction, but there are areas that will still need additional retail services. There's people that are still going to want to go to a Publix and not want to drive 30 minutes to get to one. We can help show where those might be good locations and such. And also your schools. All too often, a developer will go to the school board and say, hey, do you guys need any schools? And they'll say, well, tell us about your project. And they say, no, you don't need any schools. Our model tends to be more accurate in terms of determining where and when schools. I've had school boards tell me we don't need a school over there, and sure enough, 3 years later, school shows up. Our data showed that those kids were going to show up, and they didn't believe it based on, we do a totally different methodology than the school board uses, and nothing against what they do. We're more about long range. They're more about in the next few years, but we have a pretty robust system. So some key questions is, are the facilities that we have planned or what we already have on the ground, that substantial investment that we've made, is it enough? And what happens when the growth occurs? Where are we going to be needing more of these things like fire stations, schools, et cetera? More importantly, is growth paying for growth, or are developers reserving the appropriate amount of land? right? Let's say that someone said, well, I'm going to build the subdivision, and to reduce trips and increase internal capture, I'm going to provide a neighborhood shopping center. That sounds great. And they're going to allocate 4 acres for that. Well, 4 acres is not enough for a neighborhood shopping center. Or let's say they were going to allocate 5 acres for a school. Well, when we dig through your data, we find that the average elementary school is 9.46 acres. So regardless about the decimal places, we know that 4 acres is not enough land to set aside. Conversely, if they want to set aside 100 acres, that's probably way too much as well. How will a certain so I've talked about how we can model all these projects going on all at the same time, but we can then look at specific projects and say, okay, well, when this project comes along, how might it impact your system? And we can run different scenarios where we're just doing a project in Martin County where we tested different demographics. We tested a retirement demographic, a family demographic, and then a hybrid demographic. And when we ran the vanilla, if you take the average household size and vacancy rate in that county and you run that through, and the average number of household children for a household, they needed like 30% of an elementary school. If you ran the retirees, no shock, they didn't need an elementary school at all. But if the family showed up, you need 2 elementary schools. But if the hybrid occurs, which we think is likely, they're going to need a full elementary school. An elementary school there is about 900 students, and we calculated like 800 students are going to show up in this 4,000 plus lot subdivision over time. So we were able to suggest, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to listen, but we think you're going to need 10 to 15 acres for an elementary school in order to reduce the outside traffic. Right? If we don't provide a school here, now we have all these buses and parents leaving this place to go get their kids and bring them back. Well, if the demand is there, why not have the school there? I realize you're not the school board and you don't have the control over that, but I think as policymakers, you can certainly advocate for proper planning so that we minimize the impact on our roads. Because these things have ripple effects, right? If we don't put in a school in the right place, it clogs our roads up and causes all kinds of congestion and such. Well, what is growth expected in the JPA? Well, we've done some basic analysis. And we think there's about just under 12,000 housing units in the JPA right now. We think that's going to swell to somewhere around 50,000 units. Right now in the city, you have about 22,700 housing units, and we think that you're going to be going to about 34,000 or 35,000. In other words, your city, if you didn't change anything, what's in place right now, you're going to increase your population by another 50%, plus or minus. And you can also use the model to help test what areas make the most sense for annexation. There is no magic annexation button in the model that says, should I annex? But it provides data that you can use to make smart decisions. And I'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about Auburn, Alabama. So how will a proposed policy impact some department or something? How will the demographics change over time? We can model these things so you can get an idea. What if we have an older demographic, or what if we have a younger demographic moving into St. Cloud because of the price points make it more attractive for families? Well, what is that going to mean for parks and schools and all those things? Because it all sort of runs downhill. How will these changes affect the planning for the schools and emergency services? We can calculate that. The utilities, we can give you an idea of what we can either use a standard level of service for water and sewer demand and generation rates, or your utility department can give that to us, and we can give you the estimated change in your demands for those services. We're currently working on 3 separate water and sewer master plans with AECom for various governments, and it's very interesting looking at how the growth is impacting the demand for these services. We've been recognized by the Florida Planning, by APA and FPZA for innovation in our work, and we've been featured in Planning Magazine 3 times. I know you guys aren't planners, but in the planning world, that's our magazine, and so we're honored to be mentioned in it 3 times. I mentioned 3 stories about us. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of really what makes us different, and it's a logistic curve. And with that said, we didn't invent the logistic curve. You know, it comes back from actually a French mathematician, Villacouste, back in the 1700s. He actually forecasted the population of the United States in 1900 and hit it within 1%, which is pretty good considering he didn't have GIS or satellites, you know. But we're different in Bieber and many of our other competitors because as I was just looking at a set of data the other day, the traditional method is, how are they growing over the last 1, 2, 5, or 20 years? I've grown at 2%. Well, then here's a crazy idea. I'll grow by 2% forever in the future. And that might work out that way, but in areas, like I was just talking with the city of Naples yesterday, well, there's about 3 square feet of vacant land. There is no place for people to show up other than redevelopment. And there is some redevelopment occurring, but there's no way that the development is, the population there is going to go up by 40% when there's no room for new development. But yet, other people, other forecasters forecast them to continue growing, and it's just not simply possible. So we have an upper limit. That's why we go through great pains to calculate a reasonable build-out potential. And then our model uses logistic curves, one for each zone, that matches the baseline, or connects the baseline to the build-out. So in this case, where you see on the slide there, you see the word baseline. That's about the midpoint. We call that the inflection point on a pro-read logistic curve. You guys, I would say, are just above that, right where, just above where the B in the baseline is where I think you guys are at this point in time. And now, actually, let me prove it to you. So there you are. So that's not math. That is just simply plotting your population over time. And as you can see, it accelerated greatly over the last 20-plus years. And it's likely to occur in the same fashion for the next 10 to 15 years, and then probably your growth will increase at a decreasing rate. Right now, it looks like you're almost still accelerating a little bit, then you head into a linear phase, and then you're still going to grow, but the rate of growth is going to probably taper off in the next 20, 25 years. Love to run a model, love to find out what that says about it. The question is, without build-out, how do we know what your upper limit looks like? So we need to do this build-out analysis. It's very important. And as you can see, these are just lines that Sarah drew on the graph. But you know, if we just do some simple math, I think you're going to have somewhere in the 85,000 85,000 housing units between the JPA as it exists today. And if we do some simple math, you're clearly looking at over 200,000 people in that time. So if you're looking at modifying the JPA or understanding more about what that means and when it means, when that's likely to occur, this model is perfect for identifying those opportunities and strengths and weaknesses. So once we build the basic model, which is housing population, we then have a commercial model which tells us what the current supply, what the future demand is likely to be, and how that translates into the need for certain commercial spaces. I think that's important because when we look at your DRIs that are mostly in your JPA, there's millions and millions of square feet, and I've just done some basic calculations on a napkin on my desk, and at first I thought, wow, this is crazy, there's way too much commercial land here, and I could make a case why there might not actually be enough. Now, the thing is, when you talk about enough, not enough, or too much, that's more of an aggregate figure. The truth is you might have too much over here and not enough over here. And that's, again, where the model comes in and says, okay, well, we have 18 million square feet planned over here and none over here. Here's an idea. We need to have some of that land allocated over here to reduce unnecessary transportation and congestion and such. We have an industrial model, and that is mostly designed to help you keep up with how much space do you need, how many acres are you going to need to keep providing a place for industrial users to go, because industrial actually translates usually into job growth. And you have some industrial land right now in the city, but I would say depending on how much more you want to grow, and it really is your choice because you have control over the JPA, you might need to be looking at, in the comp plan, setting aside areas that might make sense for a small industrial park so you can continue growing that aspect of the economy, and again, reducing the need for people to go outside of this jurisdiction to get a cabinet maker or a carpenter or an AC person to fix their things. Those people need a place to go, and it's usually these industrial type places. If you're lucky enough to attract someone from out of town, hey, that's even better. You bring in an employer. Auburn, Alabama, they are the kings as far as I'm concerned of bringing people in. They have an economic team they send all over the world. They're very picky about what they have. Now, yes, they do have the University of Auburn right there in their backyard, but they like, for instance, you guys have about 21 or 22 square feet of industrial for every man, woman, and child. I thought that was kind of low. Then I looked at whole Osceola County, and you're actually tracking within 1 square foot of them. So your DNA matches that of Osceola County, but if I start talking about Auburn, Alabama, we're talking about 60, 70 square feet of industrial space for every man, woman, and child. Why? They're really good at job creation and job generation. It's not that the people who live there need that much industrial space. It's they're that good at attracting outside employers to help provide jobs for their youngsters. So I already talked about, we had a school model that forecasts a need for public schools. We generally don't get into the charter schools, because the problem with those is they're more of a decision. They pop up and they go away. I've seen it happen locally where I live. So we tend to only forecast the public schools. Sometimes we forecast the public school, it's not needed, because actually a charter school does pop up. I'll say, though, that if we say an elementary school is needed, it might be a charter, it might not, but an elementary school is going to be needed based on that change in population. We have a model for fire stations. We determine what your level of service is. We can look at drive time scenarios and so forth, and tell you when and where you're likely to need more fire stations to keep up with things. I noted you guys, I believe, only have 3 in the city proper. There's all kinds ringing around you. I think I looked at about 17 or 18 yesterday that are even outside of the JPA. But I thought you guys had more than 3, but turns out 3. Parks, we can run a park model, help determine how do we keep up with the need and demand for parks, because parks really add to a high quality of life, having a place for youngsters to go play ball games and families to just do family things on weekends. I also noted in your DRIs, many of them have civic spaces set aside, but we can talk about whether a neighborhood, a community, or regional park might be necessary. We can also get into law enforcement. We have a model that we've developed. It can get very, very complicated. We won an award for the master plan we did for the Collier County Sheriff's Organization, Sheriff's Office. We actually looked at calls for service, and we're able to use land use to help forecast and predict where future calls of service would be. And they started looking at how they were going to change their patrol districts and such. Now, that's a huge county with a lot going on. I don't know if you need all of that here, but we have a level of that provided in the proposal that we provided. Then we have utilities as well, so we can forecast where and when you're going to have demands for services. Our model is unique as far as I know. I actually wrote the code for it, and people usually give you 1 of 2 flavors. I can either use the per capita method, or I can use the housing method. Well, our model does both. So you can just flick a toggle, and I can either look at, okay, let's look only at population, or I can, if I flip the toggle over, I can now look at housing units and commercial, because all too often when people are studying water and sewer demand usage, they only look at the people and they don't look at the businesses. And of course, businesses create a demand for these services. Maybe not as much on an ERU basis as you brought up earlier, but they matter. When you start stacking them all up, they add to the demand for water and service. So we have the ability to flip back and forth. And then finally, we have an impervious area model. What it does is we study your existing area, how you've developed so far, and based on the future development, we can tell you where we think more impervious area is going to show up, which means you can help hopefully cut things off at the pass with water quality degradation, or an understanding too of where you might have more irrigation needs, because when we know there's impervious area, we know there's pervious area that's going to need water irrigation services as well. There's a quote from Mike Bosey up there too, from Collier County. Collier County's been a client of ours since 2007. No questions so far? Or are you saving them up? Okay. So in Martin County, we help bolster their long-range plans, We tested some alternative growth and policies for them. We helped provide some policy recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners regarding how they look at their ways of growth and where they should promote growth, or maybe they should curtail growth. Or not curtail, but maybe not promote growth in certain areas. And we helped evaluate their land use and zoning designations so that they have enough, make sure they have enough industrial to keep up with the demand for it, and also enough place for new housing units to go in so they can keep their economy nice and balanced. We've also presented data for their fiscal impacts, whether the project might be fiscally negative, fiscally positive, or fiscally neutral. And some of that depends on timing, right? Sometimes when a project begins, it's fiscally negative, but by a build-out, it's fiscally positive. And we can talk about those issues if you like. Also, it analyzes the relationship between the incorporated and unincorporated area. In this case, we were working for the unincorporated county, so they want to know how Stewart and Indiantown and some of these other areas might impact them if they grow or they annex lands in so that they can increase their populations. How will that occur? What does that mean for water and sewer? We've had those conversations with them, and we have a continuing relationship with them. Auburn, Alabama. So the blue areas here are the actual city, and the orange area is what they call the optimal boundary. So in Alabama, at least in Lee County, Alabama, they have jurisdiction over anything within 4 miles of their actual city boundary. And so they have a say over, if someone comes in unincorporated county and says, I want to build a Walmart or whatever, if it's within that 4-mile ring, then Auburn can say, we agree with that or we don't agree with that. We think it's going to negatively impact us. So that may not be something you have the ability to, but they have the ability to annex or not annex lands as they see necessary. And so they use our model to help understand what areas are likely to go more rapidly or less rapidly, and more dense or less dense, so they can make fiscal determinations over what makes the most sense for them. Let's see here. They used it for their first comprehensive plan, and they're continuing. We're actually working on an update for them right now. We've been working for them since 2006, I think. And then Collier County. Collier County, we have the Collier Interactive Growth Model, and they do, again, they check the balances between residential and commercial land uses, analyze projects before they're presented to the Planning Commission. We help actually generate the commercial and industrial demands for an area that's likely to have over 100,000 new housing units. It's going to grow by 300,000 people. Today, it's the Rural Land Stewardship Area. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. And we had to make some recommendations so that the developers set aside enough land. I don't believe you guys have a lot of pre-platted things up here, but down south we have things like Cape Coral and Lehigh, all these pre-platted that ultimately are going to have 300,000 people, and they have enough commercial to support about 10,000. What does that mean? It means anything above 10,000, those people have to drive outside. There is a major corridor in Lee County called Lee Boulevard, and there was 15 or 20 years ago there was a statement by the MPO that says if we don't do something about Lehigh and provide more commercial in the right areas in there, we're going to need 8 lanes double-decker, 8 lanes out and 8 lanes in, just to get the people to and from the services that they need. So here's a crazy idea: why don't we put some services in Lehigh or allocate the land for it so that they can meet their own needs and won't have to come into town for the simplest thing. So we also worked on their water and sewer master plan. We forecasted what their future water and sewer demands are going to be. We also provided the data for their MPO, for the LRTP, for the 2045, as well as Lee County. And we helped establish a common database. We have an ongoing contract with Collier County where any one of their departments can use our services, and the budget's been set up so that whatever they need, they come to us. We've worked for solid waste, utilities, growth management, capital projects, the sheriff's office, you name it, and we've worked for them, providing data they need to help figure out what it is they're trying to solve at the given time and place. So in summary, the model helps set your priorities. As policymakers, you guys have to make some tough decisions. We just got to hear about one before our part started. And for what it's worth, and I'm not trying to say I'm you, I'm not you, but I just finished 11 years of public service myself. I was a commissioner for a special district. Mosquito control, don't laugh, but 11 years, it's a $16 million budget. We had to make some big decisions. While Collier County isn't growing as crazy as you might think, the aircraft there are aging, and so we were staring down the barrel of like $20 million in new aircraft that we have to plan for in a short period of time, and so we needed data in order to make those decisions. So all I'm trying to say is I appreciate the seats that you're sitting in. You guys have to make tough decisions all day long. You want to make the best decisions possible, and I think that you need the best data possible. We are that firm. Our research is impeccable, and if the worst should happen and someone challenges, I think that you're going to find that our data is defensible. I'm happy to go in front of any judge, and I can tell them what I do, and when I'm done with them, they're going to go, well, I don't know of a better way that can possibly be done, and we're going to go, yep, you're right. We stand up to anyone that wants to criticize, not our criticize us all you want, but the way we go about things and what our finding, we found this answer. Do you have a different answer? Oh, you don't? Well, then that must be the answer. So I hope that helps. Can also help plan for co-locating facilities, and also can be, just to remind you, can test your proposed policies, whatever they might be, whether it's changes in density or changes in your urban services boundary or whatnot. Any questions? I will.
Yes, go ahead, jump in.
All right. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Seems like a great tool, especially with, we're going to be going through our future land use element here pretty soon. So this is the kind of information we need to balance out to figure out where we're at with that needs assessment and then go from there with where to place certain land uses. Big thing for me is the future capital demand of where does certain infrastructure go. I think with new developments, it's the transportation side of things has been thought through and modeled very well. Whenever things come through, you know, everyone knows they have to do a transportation model now, and you figure out how many lanes, how many this and that. On our side, I hope we can do a better job at tracking what small improvements need to be made with intersections and turn lanes and that kind of stuff, because the big arteries get figured out. Funding for them is a different thing. I think, you know, we all need to look at the funding mechanisms for some of these and make sure that they're at the right place. Fire stations is a big thing for me of when we're talking about our JPA and do we keep on annexing, is we have a capital need to build a fire station and put equipment in it, put firefighters in it, and continue to operate it. So if things don't develop at a certain density, intensity, or even interconnectivity, some of these fire stations, like we just have so much capital going out for something like that. So that's is that the fire model that you guys have in there as well of just placement?
Yes, yeah, it's in 5-year increments. It doesn't say, oh, in 15 minutes you got to build one over there. But you have more than enough time to look out in the future so you can acquire land. In Auburn, Alabama, they went and acquired, I think, 3, and Cape Coral, they went and acquired 3 or 4 future fire station sites based on where the model said growth was likely to occur. As you're saying, you don't want to buy things you don't need for 40 years, right? But what you don't want to do is wait too long. And now instead of buying that lot for $100,000, I'm now paying $1 million because it's the only piece left and I need that. And I waited too long to buy it. The model excels at that.
And then in that, kind of getting into another level of detail, and Mr. Surgeon might correct me if I'm wrong, but right now we have a certain ISO rating. Are we at 2?
Yes.
Does this get into the granular detail of, let's say we don't even want to be at a 2, we want to be lower? This is just a discussion I had with someone of the cost benefit of certain things. I hope we can get to an ISO 1 at some point, but I just don't know what that takes cost-wise, whether it's whatever we're lacking, response time or fire hydrants or city's too big or whatever. But then our homeowners get a savings in their property taxes when we get that. So just figuring out, is 2 the right place? You know, I think certain areas of the state should have volunteer fire departments still because it's rural and, you know, you just have that level of service. So is that the kind of detail we can get into with this and some of those capital improvements?
I don't want to oversell. You know, we don't get into ISO ratings. We do look at drive times because fire and emergency services is partly a function of population. In theory, when I have one house and one person, I need an entire fire station, I need an entire EMS because I have that person. But then that's sort of the easy in a way. The problem is, when do I need the next one? Is it 15,000? Because that's generally what we find is a good level of service. Is it 16,000? Is it 17,000? Well, depending on the area and the congestion, what we're finding in areas because of congestion itself in Collier County, they're now building fire stations closer together because they can't get from here to there fast enough and save people's lives. So their actual level of service, they're increasing it by reducing the amount of population served by each location. So we can help with drive times, we can help with response and look at the water and sewer lines as well, because that all goes into the ISO rating. I used to live in an area that wasn't served by water and sewer, and so they had these big old military trucks with water they would bring in and go down the canal, suck it, fill the truck back up, and come back and keep putting out the fire in your house. I think I had an ISO of 3 or 4. My fire insurance was through the roof. No pun intended. If water and sewer service had been there, we would have had an ISO of 1. We had a fabulous fire department, but when you're surrounded by woods and you have no other water supply, it becomes problematic. So it's not going to forecast your ISO rating, but it's going to give the data that I think if we can work with your fire department and outside fire departments to help understand the optimal placement of future facilities to enhance the ISO rating, minimize the cost to your taxpayers, whether it's taxes or I don't care whether it's taxes or the insurance company, it's still money out of my wallet, right? And if you can save me money, that makes me happy as a...
Mr. Sturgeon.
Thank you. Mr. Trace, the ISO rating is based on three things: communications, water supply, and the fire department. It looks at response times, which is about station placement. It looks at training, and we do really well in those areas. And as far as the insurance ratings, it's actually banded. So the people that see the most reduction is going to be commercial from the ISO rating, whether they use ISO or factory mutual. But this is a model that we could use to do that. And the other thing you would overlay, and he doesn't do this, but is risk. What's the risk of, a catastrophic fire, not just in a residential, but your downtown area? That's our economic driver. So there's other things that we look at, but this model would help us do that.
And then, this is getting way off topic, but since we're on the fire thing, when we were going through I went through the capital plan when we were going through the budgeting process. I don't think we really talked the capital plan too much, but one of the things was to get an aerial truck because we'll have certain buildings over a certain height to do that. Is that something when we're talking about land use planning, if there's certain areas we're saying will have intense growth or dense growth, is that one of those of, do we need to change some of our fees or policies or whatever to help pay for those, that infrastructure that's needed? Because the equipment itself is still infrastructure as well.
Yes, I agree with your assessment on that. That would help us do that. Again, ISO, having a ladder truck is part of the ISO formula, or a salvage unit is what they call it. And it's not really about the height of the building. It's about, can you go in and salvage during a fire to make sure we don't have water damage? And that's really, because it's insurance.
Yep.
So yeah, that definitely could help us do that, because we'll know where that density looks like. Density starts getting smaller and you start going up. That's when you start having those challenges.
And then budgeting wise, for us, we've had a structurally imbalanced budget for a number of years, and it's Bill's done a good job, or Mr. Sturgeon's done a good job, and staff have done a good job of reducing that structural imbalance to where it's less negative every year, and we're not having to use the savings account essentially to help balance the budget. Is this something that'll help ensure that we're not getting to that point again, I guess, to kind of have some flags come up early?
I want to say yes, but let me start with a no, but a qualified no.
Okay.
So no, it doesn't point and say, here's the answer in flashing lights, but it's going to give you a better understanding of where housing is likely to occur, how much of it's likely to occur, and then we can look at, the model doesn't do this directly, but we can then apply some housing values and those sorts of things and get a better understanding of which areas might be more fiscally positive, fiscally neutral, or otherwise. Obviously like fiscally positive, because then it helps pay the bills a little bit better and dip less into your reserves and such.
Because I had a 2-hour meeting with Mr. McDonald from Raftillis about, we had a report come in that they put together for Edgewater, which is one of the big developments kind of on the southwest side of the JPA. And okay. We just had a long discussion about a lot of stuff about it, and just how ad valorem and to save our homes and some of the other stipulations end up really affecting the way tax revenue comes in and out. And I don't know if that's something that, is this a tool that you can plug in some of those constraints of just to save our homes? I mean, it's statewide, so it's kind of, all the other counties probably have the same issue, all your other clients in the state of, if people don't move or buy or sell houses or whatever, then you're just limited on that tax growth.
So it doesn't look at tax rates and those sorts of things, but what we could do, and this is what's contemplated in our scope, but what we can do is take a look. I said we were disaggregated, right, in 145 different traffic analysis zones, and we could look at each zone and say what its propensity is, what's the average in that zone for save our homes or those kinds of discounts, or what is we can even take and tell you what the total taxable value is by every one of those zones, and then look at zones that are coming into development and how what revenues they're likely to generate. But that's not part of the model as it sits.
Okay, because we have, I don't know if our city's unique or not based on kind of the stages or the timing of growth that we've had, because we have a big section of town, we call the grid, that has housing of an average age of like the 60s, right? Like kind of pre-Disney, that's where the city congregated. Then in the 90s, there was kind of this section, and in the 2000s, and then now we've got some of these other areas. and your model is kind of showing what happens after that. And just, we now are seeing a lot of reinvestment into the grid area of folks either selling or putting extra money into their houses and then getting that. It's kind of correcting some of the Save Our Homes issue of it, of people are moving out or snowbirds that aren't coming down anymore or whatever, which is ultimately, I think, going to help us in that downtown area of the taxable revenue coming back and reinvestment there. But then that issue kind of moves further down into some of the older stuff that was built. 2000 is going to seem really old in a couple years, right? So that kind of progression through, and I just want to make sure that we have an idea of what that looks like, just revenue-wise. Just trying to think 10 or 20 years down the road with that. And then how do you guys determine that right balance of commercial, industrial, residential? Is that something that you guys will help set for us, based on what's ideal versus what we have versus?
So what we do is we look at your DNA, and you're right around 22 square feet of industrial for man, woman, and child. And I can compare you against other areas in the state of Florida, like in Collier County, I think we're at 32, and Lee County, I think we're closer to 42 square feet. And that's not surprising because a lot of the things that we get in Collier County, where I live, actually do come from Lee County. It's almost 1 million people there versus 400,000 where we live. So you need a certain amount of people. Like when we hit 300,000 in Naples, that's when Best Buy showed up. They wouldn't show up a day sooner, but we had to hit 300. Well, there's other people that wait till you hit 5, 6, 7, 800,000, and so we get those services from them. But that's why it's important to understand what your DNA is. And then, I don't know if you're going to like this statement, but industrial is really a policy decision. You can decide, and I won't name them, but we've had clients say, I don't want 1 more square foot of industrial. We are a nice place, and they can go outside of the town if they want that service. Fine, we're not here. It's a policy decision, and it's your job, not my job, to make that. And so we can accommodate that. If you say, you know what, we really want to bolster our economic development, then we might say, well, you might want to look and say, in the future, our goal is to have 30 square feet of industrial services for a man, woman, and child, and we can then calculate and forecast, predict how much land that is, and we can suggest areas that might make the most sense. Here's a quickie. It's going to probably be close to big roads so that people can get in and out of them easily, and not some little pocket somewhere. As far as your commercial, we'll look at your overall commercial. And we're going to compare you, because we do this all over the place. We have lots of data on what's, I'm going to put air quotes, normal for an area that's at about between 55 and 60,000 people. You are not a full grown up yet. We find that your full commercial demand doesn't mature until you hit about 150,000 people. And when you hit 150,000, the demand is somewhere between 95 and 100 square feet for every man, woman, and child. For a city of this size, I'm going to guess that you're right around 70, 75 square feet for every man, woman, and child. I haven't looked at the data yet, but I'm going to guess that. Point is as you grow, you don't just need 75 more square feet for every person that shows up, but the more people that show up, the more you're going to need, because the types of demands they're going to have are going to evolve, right? Like, I happen to be married. My wife has a diamond, so I have a need for a diamond cutter. I'm going to tell you it's a really small need, okay? But collectively, when you add that up, if you have enough people, I need a full diamond cutter. Well, you probably aren't at the point where you need a diamond cutter here in St. Cloud yet, but at some point, you're going to reach a certain stage where you're going to need things, maybe not a diamond cutter, but specialties.
You cut diamonds? I don't know.
We already got one.
Yeah, I don't cut that.
Are you a diamond cutter?
He's a jeweler.
He's a jeweler.
Oh, jeweler, okay. I guess Sarah told me there was a jeweler here, but I didn't even think about that. I was just, Dr. Van Buskirk likes using the diamond cutter example because it's obscure, but you can see that there's a small need, and you understand that not every town needs a diamond cutter, but there's a demand for it, and that those belong in certain places. And as you evolve, I could even see a Costco showing up here. I think you're 25 miles away from a Costco. With your age, your demographic, your earning potential, it would not shock me in the next 5 to 10 years to see a Costco show up here. And with that comes not just Costco, but with that becomes even more things. Might be more warehouse space, and et cetera. So it sort of feeds on itself. Sorry. Quick answer, yes, we can help.
And that brings me to, I'm weirdly excited about the census numbers coming out, and I feel
Us
like
too.
10 years ago, 20 years ago, the city was a lot different, and there's a lot of people that look at those numbers when they're putting capital investment in the commercial, industrial, and hopefully the numbers come out good, and then it'll flock for a lot of that infrastructure coming in. And I'll speak for myself, but I have a feeling a lot of the folks feel the same way of, we do want industrial here. I think we appreciate the jobs and the diversity that it brings into the area. So we're wanting to put, or at least I'm wanting to make sure that there's pockets of that, because right now, I think a lot of the developers make more money per acre on the residential side, and we're not able to hold back enough because we don't have something to say, especially areas that are in the JPA, but outside of the city limits, to say, no, you have to just hold back 20 acres here, 10 acres here for something different, that when it comes around, it'll be worth more to you guys, but right now, it's not the highest and best use, or value-wise.
You're a great student of observation, because that happens everywhere. In fact, in another unnamed location, I was doing some analysis, and I found I was short by about 1 million square feet. So in round numbers, 1 million square feet is about 100 acres of industrial. And so I called a developer that's doing a massive development, and they had proposed a certain quantity, much less than the million. And I called them up and I said, look, I always work for government. We don't work for developers, okay? But I called them up and said, look, I'm finding a shortage of industrial. Would you guys be willing to take this on? And he said, thank you for calling me. And the answer is absolutely not. He said, we've set aside 200 or whatever it was, 1,000 square feet. He says, I'll be lucky if my grandchildren are still alive when that's actually in demand. Now, I think he's short selling himself. I think that there's going to be a significant demand there as more growth occurs. But yeah, developers are not too keen on, right? Because it comes to the time value of money. If I've got to hold it for 50 years, I need to make a lot more money, and industrial tends not to go for a lot of money, with all things being said. Plus, the taxes, I got to pay taxes on that land until someone finally wants to develop it, right? So those are some things making it more challenging. I will tell you that in some of the areas we work that have these things called villages or hamlets and such, they're requesting developers set aside 20 to 40 acres for what they're calling job centers. It isn't necessarily, it could be an office complex, but it could also be a light industrial. You know, we think of industrial, we think of the asphalt batch plant and the concrete batch plant, those loud, heavy, noxious uses. And that is a form of industrial, but there's a lot of industrial that, like an Amazon warehouse, that is just a building, and people show up and they do magic things in there, and that's all that happens, right? And so those are not necessarily offensive to or incompatible with things around them. But we need the land set aside for things like that. I'm not pushing Amazon. I'm just saying that there's a lot of light and clean industrial, but if we don't have the space for it, it can be problematic. So.
Well, and there's an area in Horizon West, and I can't remember their Commerce Commercial or something, one of their districts that I kind of want us to set up in some of these of, you can have light industrial now, like areas that might make sense, and you can do your 330, 660 foot blocks, and you have your block ready to where if later down the road you can build a high rise there, they can take out that light industrial, it was only $100 a square foot or whatever to build, and then they can build something that has more density to it, and you're just, the holding use right now is that light industrial for 25 years until the building becomes obsolete, and then also the density is there around it, or the need is there for it to go vertical. So there's some of the things I would like us to set up in part of our land use.
Thank you for saying that. You touched on a pet peeve of mine, that people, when they look at commercial, like it's always going to be commercial. Look, development and our natural state of life is evolution, right? Most single-family homes will only be a single-family home. Got that. But a lot of commercial, you know, the areas of town change. When I moved to Naples, the hot area is now much less hot. The whole center of town is moved by about 8 miles. And so the demand for commercial in the areas from 1989 are less so. They're looking now at revitalizing those by what? Adding more people, right? Because retail and commercial uses need people to be successful. And so what happened is everyone was shopping there. Now everyone's not shopping there. We need more people that live there so they can patronize those local people. So I applaud your thinking in terms of, you know, sometimes it's okay if we'll zone that for industrial, we'll have a light industrial use in there and they'll serve their purpose. And when that becomes not the highest and best use, someone will come along, they're going to buy it, and we're going to allow them to build something that maybe even adds more tax revenue, more fiscally positive for the city. So.
Yeah, because that industrial was there because it's a good location for access, but then if it becomes congested around it, well, that's because people are there, and now the industrial will move somewhere else, and then you have more area for something more intense.
And highest and best use will win.
Yeah, and then, so was it Lee Acres, Lehigh Acres?
Lehigh Acres, yeah.
how was that fixed, of just taking areas that, or were these old GDC lots that developed into that?
I don't know if it's GDC, but yeah, that ilk.
Plat it and go kind of thing?
Yeah. It's 110 square miles, 100,000 platted lots, and the problem is not solved yet. But when the problem was first brought to my attention, there was 30,000 people there. There's now 130,000 people there, and the problem still exists. And it takes a long time to get to work, and it takes a long time to get home. So I'm working with the MPO there, I'm encouraging. So the problem is, we have property rights, and I'm a big property right fan. So how do you go into an area with all this vacant land and say, you can't sell that to a multifamily developer, you have to reserve that for commercial? And they're looking around going, there's nothing but cows around here. Well, trust me, someday we're going to need a grocery store here, and your site's the perfect one for it. So it's balancing those property rights with people's investment rights too, right? We don't want any Burt Harris claims, but I believe that there is a path to success where everyone wins. Maybe they don't get everything they want, but where everyone wins. Lehigh is that book is still being written.
Okay. I'll let you guys ask some questions.
Anything, Dave?
No, I'm good.
I have certainly enjoyed your presentation. One of the things that we're certainly aware of is that, we have experienced incredible, significant growth for our city. That's one of the things I get the most complaints about. It's like, we can, as a city council, we're just supposed to stop all the growth, disapprove every development, not do any more annexation. But I look back over the growth that we've had, and if it were not for the growth that we've had thus far, so many wonderful things that have helped transform our city, like the downtown revitalization and the next phase that we're going into, would not have been possible without the growth. And one of the things that I like about what I think I'm hearing is it's like at my church, we have brought in a consultant in our church. I have a church that's 34 years old. I'm a pastor. And it's really significant when you bring in a set of outside eyes to look at stuff that's been right in front of your face, and then suddenly, because of their outside experience and exposure to other models, they just see things that you don't see. And to me, that's the wisdom of bringing in someone who has the kind of experience that you have, and certainly has worked with some of the models that you have. I think one of the other things that I liked about what I think I hear you saying is that one of our challenges is how do we as a growing city work with the county, because most of the most significant growth, the largest developments that have taken place, two that we've annexed, another one that may or may not be annexed, took place in the county. And how do we work with the county to continue to improve and to work strategically to not only manage this growth that's taking place around us, because if we just say no, it's going to take place anyway. And I just don't see the wisdom of not being able to have any say-so on what happens. And it sure seems like that's one of the strategies that I think you help us develop, is it not?
Yeah, so it's not a pro-growth model. It's not an anti-growth model. It's just a growth model. It shows where things and when they're likely to occur. And I hope I don't say this the wrong way, but timing is everything. And I'm asking this without having an answer in mind, but tell me which one is better. Is it better for you to let a town, village, major DRI develop right outside the city, and you get no impact fee credits? Oh, and then you annex it. Or is it better to annex that thing with the understanding that now at least I'm going to have some capital contributions coming in to help with my debt load, right, to reduce the amount of money I'm going to have to spend anyway to provide services for these people, even though they're outside the city. If they're using my infrastructure, then your existing taxpayers have to compensate for that. So understanding that if something's going to grow rapidly and it's going to be generating a lot of impact fees, that might be advantageous to do something sooner than later. And I'm not saying you should be annexing. I'm saying it's just if you see in the end, 30 years from now, we're probably going to annex that. It might be better to do that sooner than later. Whereas other DRIs, you might say, you know what, we're going to cut that out because that one just doesn't make sense for us because of who we are. It doesn't have any industrial space. It's not proposing any job centers. It's not proposing any of the things that are taking loads off. All it's doing is it's providing generators, people, right? No attractors. What we want to do is we want to balance those generators and attractors to minimize the unnecessary trips into town and so forth. So, yeah.
Mr. Sturgeon.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. First off, thank you, David. That was a great presentation. I've seen it a couple times and really impressed with your product. I'm going to recommend we move forward with this modeling. We do have it budgeted in this year's fiscal year budget. The other thing we didn't do is we didn't budget for the modules, but we do have money we can put together to go ahead and purchase that part. So I'd like to make that recommendation. Secondly, the good news is we've discussed this, had a really productive meeting with the county manager and deputy county manager, Veronica and I did, Mrs. Miller and I did. Last week, and they're very interested in partnering us on and finding and locating industrial areas in the JPA that we can work on together. So those relationships are starting to work. Additionally, they didn't commit to it, but they're interested in helping us cost share on this program. It's about $230,000 with all the modules, and then we actually, in your package, had Mr. McDonald do an economic analysis looking at this data that we also project. So I would recommend we go ahead and move forward with this. I could put it on the next agenda for your final action.
Mr. Askew, see your number?
I'm good with all that, Bill. So when we go ahead and start modeling this thing, how far are we going out? Is it the annexation part? The annexation part and changing land development codes has become a very sticky point up here because we get mixed data. I mean, one person seems to tell us one thing and then we get something that's out. Your modeling, is it going to show a little bit cleaner? I mean, I would assume it's going to be conservative modeling, or do you do something like if it's aggressive and here's a conservative way of looking at it, here's an aggressive way of looking at it? And is it all, are you going to give us something of timing of saying, hey, we hit this number, we should be looking at this fire station, or we should be looking at this police station?
A lot of questions. Broadly speaking, yes, to most of those questions. So what we do is we build the baseline and build out data sets first, and then we construct the housing and population model. And because we believe that everything comes from people, right? If no one ever lived here, would I need a single fire station? No. Would I need a store? No, I don't. So it's people related. So we need to understand the people first, and then everything else, all the submodels will get run after that. In terms of, I remember all your questions.
Like, are you going to have sewer and water in there?
So that's a sub-model that we run once we get the people right, and then once we understand where your service areas are, your urban services boundary, yes, then we can run that utility model, get an idea of what your demands are today, and it'll forecast right into the future. And again, not on some gradient level, oh, it's going to go up by 3%. No, if no new people move in there, then your flows are not going to go up or down. But as people move into these areas, you're going to see in some areas it's going to be very flat, in some areas it's going to go up like a rocket as these areas wind up developing. We've been looking at some of your subdivisions and neighborhoods, and it's breathtaking how quickly some of these places are building out. In fact, we pulled your property appraiser data, and I can't remember what the raw data said about the single-family homes, but we were working on the south end near Nolte Road, I think, and I found on the Google Maps it shows a farm field. And then I glimpsed in incognito mode, that's a new thing we learned, in incognito mode in Google Maps, we found that there were houses there. And so we went, wait a minute. So we started looking at multiple aerial data sets, and we actually found 1,000 homes that have been finished that still are not showing up in the property appraiser's records because there's a lag, right? You say CO a home, and then it takes 3 to 6 months, depending on the property appraiser, for that stuff to show up. That's, mind-boggling. So in a 6-month period, we now have 1,000 more homes. Your permitting must be off the roof right now. So I can imagine you're experiencing quite a bit of growth.
Yeah, just in 1 month last month, we brought in $4.4 million in impact fees for the school alone. 1 month.
Wow.
That's 2 high schools in a year. If it stays at that level, it's normally about $1 million, $1.5 million per month.
My goodness, yeah. So we are going to tell you when and where the people are going to show up. It's going to be like on a zone basis. We'll put that into a GIS web-based application where you can see some of it. You have to actually click on things. It's not like a movie or anything, but you can. We have a little tool where you can add up the people and you can see what the changes are between now and 2025, 2030, 2040, et cetera. As far as asking about, Beaver does a low, a medium, and a high. By the way, I think Beaver has you guys at around 50,000. The census number that I saw on Wikipedia was 58,000. The population estimates program was like 56,000. The population estimates program is a totally different program than the decennial census. Point is, there's different numbers out there depending on how you look at things. We generally don't run several versions of that, but I'll commit to you that it's not that big a deal for me to run a couple additional scenarios with maybe more contracted growth and more expanded growth. You can do that through changing the growth rates or through changing demographics. I can't do both, but I can do one or the other. I can either change the growth rate or change the demographics, and you can see what the impact is to your schools, fire stations, all those things.
Excellent, thank you.
And then one of the other concerns, additional concerns I have on anything west of the Turnpike is between the Kissimmee Park crossover and the Friars Cove crossover, 3.5 miles of one way in, one way out, essentially. I don't know how we alleviate that, fix that, but that if the services that are necessary on that side of the road aren't there, they're going to be coming over the other side, and it'll just be a bottleneck. So I don't know if that's something that transportation analysis will show. They'll just show that, you know, whatever they generate gets out.
And to be clear, we don't do the transportation
I know.
modeling. We just provide the data for it. But
I just want to make sure there are right-sized, that there are right-sized commercial industrial things on that side of the road to where we make sure we don't have to. Yeah.
is that a DRI that crosses the Turnpike? There's a little piece of it on the east side of the Turnpike, but most of it's on the west side of the Turnpike?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, we've looked at that, yeah. So they have a ton of commercial, and we were struggling over how that's all going to happen.
Yeah, Edgewater is one of them that has 1.9 million square feet of office and 1 million square feet of commercial in a 90-acre chunk. It's just like, that's not possible.
So normally optimally, you have about 10,000 square feet per acre. And so would you say about 3 million square feet? That would be 300 acres. That's a single story. So guaranteed, we're talking about more stories, which might lead to your ladder truck or other things. I don't see any way, when you take modern water management and parking and you add it all up, even when you take two-story, you'd think that, I can double up, but the problem is
You
because
need
you need
more
more parking, though that's about the same FAR. It's when you then start going way up that.
Yeah, you
things
need
start-
garages at that point, once you get over 0.2 FAR. yeah.
Right. So,
Do we have a consensus
Probably not.
to recommend moving forward with?
Yeah, I hope we can get the modules in there as well, when Bill's done.
Yeah, you said
he's gonna pick up
and we're ready to hit the ground running.
And then Bill, on some of those other modules, the parks module, we have another consultant that was doing kind of our needs assessment on the park side. Does that flow into this, or how?
That is some of the unanswered questions we need to look at. Like I said, we have, utility models we're using. I just want to make sure we're not duplicating efforts. The other challenge we have, I would imagine, David, is some of the stuff we've done with other consultants, maybe not overlay into your model or could skew your data.
Well, let me say this the best way possible. So we'd like to do our work in a vacuum first, and then say, okay, well, this is what we found. And then you say, well, our other consultant said twice that or half that. Well, then let me take a look at it. Oh, I see what they say there. Or, well, yep, they're different, but here's where we got our data from. This is why we think. And then, it's not who's right. It's what's the best methodology to figure this out.
And I agree. And I've always struggled with census data, Beaver data, and how to plan for
And
city
both are wrong.
services. What's that?
And both are wrong.
And both are wrong, right. So we've always struggled with that. So again, if we're going to use this modeling software, then we have to agree that that's the software we're going to use and make decisions, policy decisions based on that. That's my recommendation. Or we continue to use all the different models and they don't talk to each other.
And I'm viewing this as kind of the more macro in some of those
Right.
big areas, and then all the other stuff, the Reese model on the utilities and some of the parks models are in the micro, right? Just making sure we're providing the right level of service on the macro will flow down.
I think that's a great term, Mr. Trace, is macro. I think that's what we're looking at. If we get into the weeds on utilities and fire protection, there's other considerations such as risk, like I said, risk and things like that. So, but I definitely know that the data that we could share with them could help them.
Yeah. After the vacuum, once the vacuum is released.
Once the vacuum cleaner goes off,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
We love data. It's not that we
So,
ignore everything else, but.
If I could, Mayor, I had one question for David. Do you guys do reclaimed water also modeling? So I know we talked about water and wastewater, and that's a challenge for us parts of the year.
We can, We're better at the population end of things. The water and sewer are easy because you just apply an LOSS to that. But we can talk about the reclaimed. I mean, I don't have a specific expertise with that, but it often has to do with either rainy season or seasonality of your population. And since we do our
That's exactly.
demographics spatially, in other words, we don't apply one household size vacancy rate across the city. We do it spatially, so we understand where more school-age children are likely to show up, or where more of the retirees are, where people are more seasonal or less seasonal, and that's where you might see more of those variations. So, we only work for government. Yes, we have a contract in front of you. I want to say that we pledge to be flexible with you. If you want to move money, we don't want to do that anymore. Now I want to do this. It's fine with us. You know, we're here to work with you and try to make your lives better. We hope.
Anything else from us?
No, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
Have any other
Thank you.
input?
Thank you.
Mr. Farmer, we're very grateful. Thank you. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Take care.
Thank you so much. The next item on our agenda is we have a discussion regarding an alternative wastewater treatment unit for limited situations, modifications, and fee recommendations for the Land Development Code related to new development and irrigation demand management initiatives. And I believe we'll recognize Marjorie to start with.
Hi, and I've got my trusty sidekick, Cameron, with me. And I'd like to tell you that we have costume changes, and we're going to be as exciting as the last person, but we're going to try to keep it move it along as snappily as we can. So we've got 3 major subjects. If I can. And it's a lot of information. But we're going to try to move it along as fast as we can, but also allow enough time for you to ask questions and really stress the importance of these subjects. So the first item that we're going to discuss is the one water approach. Where is my very exciting prop? So one thing in the industry, and I wish I could tell you that I made this up, but that we have really been striving towards is something called the one water approach. And you'll see it around. It's not just a statewide initiative, it's a nationwide initiative. And it's considering all water is valuable. Potable water, reuse, wastewater, stormwater, rainwater, everything. And the value of that water. So, and Florida, you'd think that we wouldn't have a water problem. We don't really have a water supply problem, we have a timing and distribution problem. It's not where we need it, when we need it. So, in order to get it where we need it, when we need it, we need to do some demand management, implement some really strict, really strong demand management initiatives, and we'll talk about those. We have some reuse rate recommendations. And in my career, it's really, 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 really important not to do those things when the finance director is gone. So we're not going to do that when Wendy's gone. So we're going to table that till when she returns. And we would like to establish some reuse irrigation zones and some enforcement. And reuse zones that's not a new concept. That's very common. However, ours have a little bit different twist. And also, we're going to blatantly plagiarize a landscape irrigation efficiency initiative from the Toho Water Authority. Instead of TEP we're going to call it STEP for St. Cloud. So, Cameron's going to talk a little bit more about that. He'll tell you exactly what that means. The second major topic we're going to talk about is an equitable new development, an equitable land development code change and fee modifications for new development. And this was actually brought to us by the developers, and they said, hey, if I'm a small development, I've got to do a propagation study, and I might have to pay for a new AMI tower, and it costs me $150,000, and it's the same price as some giant development. And they may come along after me, and they don't have to pay for it, and they just get to just come along after me and not have to pay for it. So we looked at that. We said, you know what, you're right. and also with the odor control and the emergency bypass pumps. So we looked at a more equitable way to pay for those, and we're going to recommend that. And then the third is the alternative wastewater treatment unit. This is an outside-the-box option. This is for limited situations. These are one-offs. This is not something that we're looking to have throughout the system. This is just something to provide an option instead of a septic tank, because it provides treatment, nitrogen removal, and I did provide a packet for you with a copy of the slides, because it is quite a long presentation, and just some materials that could be used if we do move forward with it. Okay, so for the first discussion item, again, the one water concept, the reuse rate recommendations, which we're tabling, on the reuse zones, and then the efficiency initiative. And as I mentioned, it's really important to consider all water valuable, and to develop that water conserving rate culture, or water conserving culture. Store that surplus water during the wet season, and augment reuse with stormwater. We can store it, optimize all water resources, and collaborate regionally. So even one of the first things that I did when I got here is talk to Todd and say, hey, where can we strengthen those interconnects? Is there somewhere that can we take some of your reuse water? Can you, can we connect? And they can provide a little bit of reuse water to us. They would actually like to give us reuse water to put down our deep injection well. So we're going to kind of paint the picture, and you guys already know about this. You probably have received calls, hey, I'm running out of reuse water. Since 2017, our demands exceed our supply during the seasonal drought months. Now, before that, when I was with the Water Management District and Todd was in my place, and I came out to visit him, there was reuse everywhere. He could not find enough storage to put that reuse. Every pond, everything, he tried to find everywhere he could to fill the ponds with reuse storage. The golf course, water, just everywhere. Now, we run out of the reuse. So we actually supplement the reuse system with groundwater from our wells, and it's allowed from our allocation from our water use permit. From Water Treatment Plant 2, we have 2 wells there, and we supplement it with from 0.75 to 1 million gallons per day. Now that could provide water, potable water, to 2,500 to 3,300 homes, depending on which math you're using. And then we have the East Lake Toho stormwater ponds. But, Murphy's Law, that only helps us during kind of the edge times. During the real dry season, there's really not enough water in those ponds to get us through that real dry season. So there's also potable water in the northern area where we don't have the reuse that is feeding irrigation systems in the Narcoossee area. Again, that's about 500,000 gallons per day, and that could also supply about 2,000 new homes. And as moving forward, projected reuse demand significantly exceeds the projected wastewater flows. Uh-oh, what did I do? I should know how to use this thing by now. Okay, this is kind of the scary graph. So what there's a little thing here. Okay. So this is kind of misleading. If you look at this, it shows where you've got supply. I mean, it doesn't really give you a good picture of how we're running out of reuse. But what it's kind of masked by the augmentation water that we have, or the water that we're augmenting the reuse with. And then, but what you can see here is how it continues to diverge. So the problem just gets worse and worse. We really have no option than to start changing our ways. It's like you would say, Deputy Mayor, the Ponzi scheme. We can't, the old days, the factor used to be it takes 4 houses to produce enough reuse for one house for one house to have reuse. So now we're going to have to limit the reuse. So I'm going to have Cameron, so we took out the augmentation, and he's going to explain the centipede graphs.
Good afternoon, Cameron Crandall, Deputy Director of Environmental Utilities. All right, so what we're seeing here is we've got the reuse water supply versus reuse water demand graph. This is from March of 2021 through May of 2021. This is our dry season. And you can see the green line, that represents our reuse supply. And that, you know, you can see towards the end of the graph, it kind of jumps up about 1 million gallons. That's when it really started to rain for us. But the purple line is our reuse demand. That's how much we're pushing out of our wastewater treatment plant every day. So you see throughout the 3 months, sometimes we have a 2, sometimes almost a 2.5 million gallon deficit. And we only have 89 million gallons of reuse storage, so that storage gets eaten up extremely quickly. And if we go to, we got this next graph here, the 500,000 gallons of potable water that Marjorie was talking about earlier. If we looked at switching that to reuse water, the deficit becomes even greater. So we're talking 2.5 to 3 million gallons of reuse that we're missing on a daily basis. And it just to explain those dips, on Mondays we crank down our reuse system to conserve water. So on Mondays you see the big dip. But even when we're trying to use as little reuse as possible by closing valves and turning down our high service pumps, we're still using 2 to 3 million gallons every single day.
Has to be frustrating.
My elevator shoes. So there's 2 critical approaches to address reuse supply deficit. And we're going to recommend both approaches, policy initiatives and also infrastructure initiatives. And it's going to be really important, you know, y'all are the policy setters, and it's going to be really important that we get your support. Because without your support, we can't be successful. This is a really long, very small writing list of policy initiatives, and we're going to recommend all of those. And some of them will be hard. Increasing the rates, establishing these irrigation zones that Cameron will go through. Some of them will be modifying the Land Development Code for landscape and irrigation design standards. But we've seen some really nice landscape designs. Some of the developers have brought in some very nice designs. There are a lot of landscape architects that have done some beautiful work with low irrigation requiring plants. New policies and enforcement that limit potable water use for irrigation, and supporting initiatives to develop strong water conservation programs, and supporting grants and funding for storage during dry times, and again, enforcement. So infrastructure initiatives. So it still mirrors some of the policy stuff, and y'all have been very, very supportive with moving forward with the reuse pond, and many thanks to your leadership and to Congressman Soto and being able to get the reuse pond expansion at the South Side Wastewater Treatment Facility. That is a big step towards providing additional storage. And we will need additional storage beyond that, regardless of whether we integrate with Toho, at least for the short and midterm, or remain a separate utility system. So whatever we can do to augment our reuse with stormwater, rainwater harvesting, and develop regional ponds, and capture anything excess reuse during wet season. Okay, so we know we table the reuse rate. We talked about establishing these irrigation zones. Now we're going to go into a little more detail about these zones. So this has been presented to several developers since 2020 because we know we're running out of reuse. So basically, the premise is, whatever you provide our wastewater plant, the amount that you provide in wastewater, we can provide you for reuse for your project. So we need to amend the land development code for development by establishing the design basis limiting irrigation demand through the landscape and irrigation design. And that includes Edgewater, Tahokwa, Center Lake. They're very receptive, and they understand. They understand why. So the proposed solution established 4 irrigation zones based on the existing conditions. Because we have areas that have potable irrigation, we have existing reuse irrigation zones, and then we will have reuse irrigation limited to wastewater produced zone, and then we'll probably end up having to have restricted potable irrigation zone. So with that, you should, in your folder, have a little bigger map so that you can see that better. And then I'm going to turn it over to camera to describe each of the zones.
So this Irrigation Zones Map, it shows our utility service boundary area. Then it has the 4 different colors, and this is really incorporating the development that has happened in the past, and we're looking forward to the development in the future. So the first zone I'm going to talk about is the blue zone. That's the potable irrigation zone. This is our oldest part of the city. This was developed before we even had a reuse distribution system. Homes in this zone have a separate irrigation meter, and they have a separate potable water structure for that irrigation. But the important thing here is we want to be using this potable irrigation. We want to be using the potable water that's going on the lawns and the landscaping. We want to use that for potable uses. And the second area, that's the purple zone. This is the existing reuse irrigation zone. These are areas that were developed, starting in the late 80s until very recently. This is areas where we can see, they were originally designed with, as Marjorie was talking about, trying to get rid of reuse. We were using reuse irrigation as a form of disposing reuse. So they're almost designed to be using as much reuse as possible. And as we're talking about, under the one water, ideals, reuse water is just as precious as potable water. So we want to really encourage conservation here where possible, and also exploring other incentives to extend the reuse resource itself. And talking about the reuse rates, the reuse rate structure is just a fraction of the potable water structure, even though it's just as valuable as a resource as potable water. And further, we're talking about some of these areas, it's not even true reuse. There's no reuse infrastructure. It's potable water that's feeding these reuse pipes, and we really want to get that potable water back because, 500,000 gallons a day of potable water, that's 2,000 to 3,000 homes. The third zone we're talking about is the aqua zone. That's the reuse irrigation limited wastewater produced zone. Now, this is what we're proposing for the future. And Marjorie said, we talked with Center Lake and Tahokwa and other Edgewater, other developments, and they've really kind of met this challenge, and they're working with us. We're working with landscape professionals, the University of Florida IFAS program, and this is landscaping irrigation design. This is where we're going to get our best opportunity to conserve water, because we really haven't found alternative water supply sources yet. And so, our wastewater plant's super efficient. It can produce, it converts basically 99% of the wastewater into reuse water. And so that's where we want these new developments to, meet that challenge to only use as much reuse as they produce wastewater. And finally, the last zone, this is the restricted potable irrigation zone in orange. And this is where future development where reuse lines will not be extended due to lack of supply, because as Marjorie was talking about, it takes multiple homes worth of wastewater to produce reuse water for one home. So looking at the map, not every home is going to be able to get reuse. So we're proposing these areas, and we're not saying no irrigation whatsoever. We're talking about limited potable irrigation. We're talking about drip irrigation, misters, other forms of low water use irrigation. We're talking Florida-friendly ground cover such as Bahia, and just managing conservation through the landscape and irrigation code changes. You can still develop beautiful entryways and common areas if you know ahead of time that this is what I have to work with. These are the type of plants and irrigation I'm allowed to use.
Wow, you did good. You flew through those. That's awesome. All those words. Yeah, and that could change a little bit too. So these are just, you know, especially as technology changes. And we may find that we can stretch some water and bring some water to some other areas. So right now, and we know that some of those lines could be fluid. So this, it may appear that the C is kind of like a dangling C, but we talked about A, which is going to be the reuse rate increase, and then B are the zones. And so C is the Landscape Irrigation Efficiency Initiative, or the STEP. So STEP is right up there, the definition, if I can find the little thing. St. Cloud Efficiency Program, so STEP. And this is something where we're working with IFAS, and it's an analytic program. And Toho actually already has this program implemented. And we know that one of the biggest bangs for our buck for water conservation is related to landscape irrigation. So modifying landscape and irrigation requirements is one of the best ways to affect water conservation. It's patterned after Toho's program, and they have demonstrated, Toho has demonstrated reductions in irrigation demand. So you want to go through the key points of the STEP? Yep. Since you can blow by words better than I can, so.
And we're not just plagiarizing Toho, we're making development of landscape and irrigation in Osceola County more consistent.
That's right.
Oh, let me just jump ahead. Okay, so the key points of the St. Cloud Efficiency Program, we're talking about checklists and affidavits for builders, landscape contractors, irrigation contractors to follow. And these are Florida-friendly best management practices for protection of water resources. And some of the areas we're going to be including in this checklist and affidavits, we're talking about high-volume irrigation limited to the rear yards, or sorry, prohibited in the rear yards, micro-irrigation in the landscape beds. We want to make sure that there's working rain shutoff devices installed and that homeowners know how to control their irrigation controllers. You know, oftentimes the irrigation contractor comes in, sets the irrigation controller to every day for 2 hours for the watering in period, and then a homeowner comes in and then they get their first water bill, and it's enormous because they've been watering every day for, you know, a month, and they don't know how to change it. So this is going to help, you know, reduce that possibility from happening. And the way we're going to do is we're going to have affidavits that is signed by the irrigation contractors, landscaping, and the builders themselves. I believe you guys have a copy of one of these affidavits or checklists in your package. You know, this isn't the final product, but this is what we're kind of working with right now. Just a little bit more about the STEP program. You know, we're going to hold up certificate of occupancy until the builder or the homeowner proves STEP compliance. And the city is going to, you know, we haven't figured out the exact details, what percentage of these homes and landscapes that we're going to do inspections from, but that's going to, you know, scale up or scale down as we see fit. But we're going to check some of them, make sure that they're doing what they're saying they're going to do. And we're going to be getting typical lots with, the developments based on the homes for the different lot sizes and, utility plans for us to review. And also, inside the homes, we're going to be using water-efficient plumbing appliances. And just a little more talking about prohibiting St. Augustine turf in the rear yards, because that requires irrigation, and we don't want to have irrigation in the rear yards. So we talked about drought-tolerant, low-water ground cover back there. And we want to incorporate the HOAs and make sure that they're on board and they have, articles and codes for themselves to prohibit the St. Augustine. So, we're all working on the same side. And, entrance landscape features and common areas, kind of the same thing. We want to conserve water as much as possible. But we're also open to other things like stormwater, using stormwater for irrigation, or, having more irrigation for 6 months for the grow-in. And then once it's established, we can scale back. So, Marjorie, you want to? Okay.
So, we recommend that we go ahead and amend the land development code for the 4 irrigation zones, understanding that they could change over time, and also to add the STEP program where we partner with builders and developers and adopt the landscape efficiency program. And we'd like to know if you have any questions.
Have many of these policies already been adopted, you're saying, by Toho and by Kissimmee and not the county, or is that what you're saying?
For the STEP program, that is the case. For the irrigation zones, in concept, irrigation zones or reuse zones are common in cities and counties that have like areas where reuse is economically feasible or not economically feasible. But the way that we have actually delineated them is a little bit different. So where we've delineated, this is just a little bit different because we're saying there's potable irrigation. And I mean, we've actually, it's a little bit different. It's not, we've not said it's not economically feasible. We've just said you can have potable irrigation here and you can't have reuse here because we can't provide it here. There's not enough to provide it.
Has any discussion, again, on allowing a development to use their own retention pond for irrigating?
Yes.
Are we doing that now? Because
Yes.
we couldn't do it when we built our property at my church, because we tried our best. We put in the grass we had to put in, we put in the landscaping we had to put in, the trees, and then you'd have water, all the water you needed during the wet season. Then when you needed the most, you couldn't get it, and all your stuff that the city made us put in began to die, and so it was real frustrating. And we couldn't pump out of our own retention pond. It's 30 foot deep.
It is frustrating, and things change over time. And as I mentioned, when I first came to visit Todd back when I was with the Water Management District, there was so much reuse water. We couldn't find enough bowls to try to capture it, and there was a consent order because there was not enough places to put it. And that's why we actually built the deep injection well. And now we still need additional places to store it. If we can build additional places to store it, we can provide additional reuse to some of these zones that we can't get the reuse to. Some of the developments are looking to use ponds for some of their irrigation needs as well.
Is that a South Florida water management issue also, as far as approval or something, technically? Is that just a city issue? You'll get back with me on that one?
Yeah, I'll get back with you on that. I'm trying to remember. I haven't
All right.
thought about that in a while.
Mr. Sturgeon?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to let you know, also part of the conversation Mrs. Miller and I had with the county manager and deputy county manager was about regional stormwater ponds, where we can find those common locations, and again, supplement the reclaim. So we are looking at that from a regional perspective also, just the initial discussions, but that was one of the topics we talked about in that meeting.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Mr. Askew?
yeah, it just seems strange. I mean, you drive down 192 and you get these giant FDOT retention ponds. It just seems like you should be able to. I mean, they wouldn't care if they went dry, I guess, in the big scheme of things. It just seems like the state ought to be more flexible in allowing that to happen.
DOT, actually, there are some partnerships with DOT in some areas. So if you're public, so the public has to treat reuse before it puts it into a system. If you're private, you don't have to. So there's a development just north of town. I'm directionally challenged, so that they don't have to treat it before they use it for their irrigation. But for us, we have to treat it to a certain level.
Okay.
So there are different standards for public and private entities for reuse.
All right. So this is just, past 20, 30 years, we were kind of encouraged or forced by the Water Management District to put in purple pipe and to use reclaimed water for irrigation. Was it known that this would be the issue of 4-to-1 later down the road by the Water Management District?
So I was with the Water Management District years ago. I'm sorry, and the question was, did they know?
Yeah, I mean, so they kind of forced everyone to do this reclaimed, purple pipe everywhere, put in all the infrastructure. They would give grants, I think, back in the day. I
They
don't know if we
did.
ever got
I
any.
actually administered millions and millions of dollars of grants. So back then, the areas that had the reuse systems primarily were places that watered. So the demographics of places that watered were people that didn't care about paying to water. They would just pay whatever. And so a lot of areas of town didn't care to pay, didn't want to water, didn't care about watering their grass. I don't have an irrigation system in my yard. I don't
Yeah.
water.
I have one, I just haven't turned it on in 10
Right, you
years.
don't turn it on, right.
I don't even know what would work. So,
And a lot of places just irrigate with potable water. Water wasn't as scarce as, the growth wasn't what it is now.
oh yeah, we have plenty of water when we don't need it, and we don't
Right.
when we do, which is your stormwater pond example, right? Okay, so we put in this, the large capital investment of this reclaim systems and tanks and everything, and now we're going away from it, which is.
But you also know that they're doing a lot of direct and indirect potable
Oh, yeah,
reuse. They're drinking it now, so.
okay,
Tampa's doing that.
yeah, I know.
I'm like, you make me put in this reuse, this infrastructure, and now you want me to, that capital investment, really?
Well, and even in the purple zones, we've got this whole extra pipe that we own now. We're having to maintain. We're having to supply water for, and if it goes bad at some point, we're going to have to redo that entire pipe when it was forced upon us by the district back in the day.
Back in the day.
So the aqua zone, where is it? The reuse is limited to the wastewater production. What happens if they need more supply or they have more demand than there is supply? Like they just turn it off, like nothing comes out of the spigot, or what happens?
So we're working out the details on that. The ideal situation is for a master meter. So in Toho, what they do, they have some areas like this, so they actually turn it off if it's, or they're supplemented by a pond or stormwater augmentation. So, but if you master meter that whole subdivision, including all of the lots, then that's more easily controlled that way.
So we get 300 angry people here saying all my landscaping's dying because we went over our allocation.
Well, they'll have to be angry at the HOA then, at the whole,
Okay. The orange zone where there's no reclaimed irrigation, the restricted potable zones.
but that's a good point, because that goes to the whole education part of it too. This can't be done in a vacuum. This can't be just done, like, this is not just a, beat you until you stop using water. This is all, this takes time. We have to educate people about the importance of water, and that's why it has been shown that the price, in order to start using less water, now there's some people that are going to irrigate, I don't care what the price is. One of my customers used to be the town of Palm Beach. They had windshield wipers on their houses. They don't care what it costs. They don't care what it costs. They are going to use
like
as
that.
much water as they want. But it is one of the price point. It shows the value of that water. But you have to educate people. You have to let them know how important the water is and that value, and you have to alert them what the limits are. So it's not just about letting them loose and okay, shutting them off.
Well, the hammer thing is also raising the rate on them is part of the hammer,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we kind of skipped over that one for good reason, but
There's hammer and honey and flowers and sunshine and happy faces and
but when we turn off,
anvils and
when we shut the valve, they're no more
they're
sunshine.
angry, I know.
Can my phone shut off too when the valve goes off? It automatically shuts my phone off.
So on the orange zone, which is, so one pipe gets installed.
Did you make it orange because you're a gator? Okay. Yeah. He has a graph theme.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no. So there's only potable pipes that get put in? And is it 1 meter or 2 at the house, and then they would get billed appropriately? Like my house, there's only one pipe in there, and I have 2 meters. Granted, I never irrigate, so that one actually even got removed, I think. But they would just be limited on their supply that they get, or how does that zone work, I guess? Because the irrigation design itself at the house would be
I'm going to
limited
let my
to,
brain talk.
yeah, the drip irrigation and all that stuff, but it would be potable water?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, so the idea would be, this would be for new development, so the homes and the irrigation, the landscape would all be built according to, they would understand that they would only have this super low, limited potable water irrigation, so you would have, you'd have your separate potable water irrigation meter, and it would just go to, it would be designed in a way that it could still, stay lush and green with just that limited potable water.
Okay. What's the difference between STEP or TEP and WaterStar? Is it the same WaterStar program or thereabouts?
It's pretty similar. TEP, which Brian Wheeler kind of created or helped create, and then he came, to us and he helped create this. They're pretty similar. It's actually a little easier, what we're proposing for the STEP program, because the WaterStar required WaterStar certified inspectors to go out there and look at all these different things. We're kind of putting the onus on the builders and the landscapers and the irrigation contractors for these affidavits, and then we're going to check some of them. So it's just a little less intensive on the city staff doing it this way.
And then I only heard gripes before about WaterStar of the irrigation head itself is like 10 times the cost of a normal irrigation head. Is that, usually when the need for things goes up, someone figures out a better solution and things get cheaper. So I didn't know if you've heard anything about that.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be specifying particular brands or anything, or gold-plated irrigation heads. I mean, we're talking about, in some points, low trajectory and, limited use irrigation heads, but I don't think we're going to be recommending anything specific.
Okay.
I
And
might
then,
have to get back to you on that, and we might be able to get a grant or something for that to try to offset some of that. The other thing, and I don't know that, I don't think it's in this part of it, but there's a soil amendment that IFAS had brought forward to us, and we may have talked about it a little bit. But you mix it in when, at the beginning of the project, and it helps retain moisture in the soil for, I don't know, how, years or forever or whatever. And so it actually requires less watering.
well, we have that. It's the silt that's naturally in our soil that just yards don't drain.
Well, no, but this is like it's a mixture of a
okay.
Yeah, no, this is a little different.
The only complaints I get are because people's yards can't drain.
Yeah,
'cause
we'll
it's bad
bring,
soils.
we'll bring more information to you later, but this is a little bit different. But it's a soil amendment that they've put forward. Stop flustering me.
Sorry.
That IFAS has been studying, and it's something that can hold water in the soil and require less water, which I think would lend itself to the drip irrigation as well.
Okay. And then you mentioned Bahia only in backyards in certain zones. Is that going to be kind of the new standard across the board of just Bahia in backyards?
Yes,
I mean,
and
I'm fine with that. That's
that's
a
actually
wonder
common
conservation.
in other places too. This
Okay.
certainly would not be the first place to do that.
Because I'm all about the conservation side. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to deal with the issue later if you conserve it on the front end. And then we talked about, I think all of these were hammers. Let's get this, get the carrot and the stick out.
I never said hammers.
Can we look into programs for individuals in the blue zones, in the grid or whatever, of some sort of incentive program for them to reduce their water demand? And I don't know if that's based on their meter for the past 12 months, if they were a heavy user and they did some change to then reduce that use, or I don't know, I'm sure there are programs out there, but just something to help incentivize folks that are on that potable zone that aren't getting the low drip irrigation and all that stuff, of just incentivize people to go that route.
I think that's a great idea. There are also, as I understand it, there are people in the grid that have wells,
Oh, I'm sure.
but I'm looking around my yard, I haven't seen one. I don't have an irrigation system either, so.
And then you guys might have the answer, but then Dan might also as well, of, I believe Claremont forces everyone to use stormwater for irrigation, right?
I have a rain barrel.
I don't think they forced them to do that.
Or is it's the common space
For
area? I thought it
certain,
was,
they have a restriction related to the use of potable water that requires, and that's in place for irrigation. So they don't
Okay.
necessarily force stormwater, but they have a restriction on irrigating with potable water.
okay, I thought I remember someone telling me about, they had to put in, for common spaces, they had to use stormwater or shallow well for irrigation.
Or reclaim.
Yeah, okay. Or reclaim, so they must not have had reclaim available or something.
Yeah,
They had to do
that's
that. Okay. All right, and then to the mayor's comment about stormwater for irrigation, is that a possibility for the neighborhood themselves in the aqua zone or the orange zone to do their own stormwater?
Yeah, we'll look into that too, and Mayor, if you can ever forgive us for
Never.
never.
I don't have to forgive
We'll
you.
hear about it.
You weren't here when it happened, so, because I know you would have been more sympathetic and
I
understanding.
would certainly have been sympathetic, that is
You're
for sure.
such a sweet,
I-
touchy-feely person,
I
right?
would have been certainly sympathetic. Yeah, absolutely. And there are also, there's a lot of creative things out there. There are some creative roofs that drain water, and I do actually have a rain barrel that I use. But anyway, we'll, if it's all right with y'all, we could bring something back and have a further discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so the next item is equitable new development, equitable fee modifications for new developments. So it'd be land development criteria, code criteria and fee recommendations for new developments, for lift station odor control units, emergency backup bypass pumps, and AMI meter towers. So as I mentioned before, whether a development was 100 units or 1,000 units, these developments have to do a propagation study, and they still will have to determine whether they have to install an AMI tower. So as we move forward, we're recommending that the fee be wrapped into the tap. Oh. All right, so the current land development code requires that all lift stations have odor control. And best practices actually requires that odor control is only required if you have multiple lift stations that feed into it, and other criteria. So what we're requiring, or what we're proposing, is that this criteria here, so it's more in line with best practices.
So is that, if it's a repump, it just smells worse? Because it got pumped once and now it flows into the lift station? Okay.
Yes. And there are also other conditions. I mean, sometimes you will have a lift station that will have more odor that isn't fed with by other lift stations, but in general.
And if you can remind me, it's a minimum of twice its cycles per hour? Is that what a lift station, like a normal lift station when at design?
Yeah, that's about right.
So it's only existed for half an hour before it gets pumped, and on a repump it's existed for a couple hours, so it just gets more pungent. Okay. Good.
So actually, I'm going to turn this over to Cameron because he did the yeoman's work on this particular item. So I saw you sit down. I'm like, oh, you were supposed to do this.
No problem. So now we'll talk about emergency backup bypass pumps. Currently, we require emergency backup bypass pumps at all lift stations. We're going to be scaling that back a bit, and our new proposal will be if the lift station receives flow from one or more lift stations, if it has a peak design flow of 350 gallons per minute, that's roughly 450 homes. Also, we're very cognizant of sanitary sewer overflows right now, so if there's a significant public health impact that could happen if there was an overflow, we want to have a backup pump there, and also at the judgment of the director or designee. So the way we're going to propose to pay for this is increasing the sewer tap fee for all development, kind of spread out these costs to all new homes. And so the current sewer tap fee for a residential home inside the city limits is $120, so we're talking about a $155 increase. Outside the city limits, it's still that $155 increase, so it'd go from $150 to $305. AMI towers. Currently, every development has to perform a propagation study, and the development doesn't really perform the propagation study. We send that to Neptune. They're the manufacturer of the meters, and they do the AMI system. But if there's not full coverage, we require that development to install an AMI tower. And this is regardless of subdivision size. It's just, is there an existing AMI tower nearby? Can it read the whole parcel? And it doesn't matter how many units there is in each in the subdivision. So our proposed changes, we're still going to require a propagation study. But if there's not a full coverage, instead of that development installing the AMI tower, the city would do that, and we're going to pay for that using an increase to the water meter fees and the reuse meter fees. And that's shown here. This is our proposal. So inside the city limits, the meter tap fee for a potable water and reuse water, 3/4 inch meters, currently $280, so we increase that to $395. Outside the city limits, $420 to $535. So we're just trying to spread that cost out to all new development, so we're just not sticking one development with the huge cost of installing an AMI tower. So we're recommending these proposed language and fee modifications. through adoption by the Land Development Code. So in summary, amendment would allow for modification of the potable water meter fees, the sewer tap fees, and the reuse meter fees to collect money to pay for the odor controls, the lift station backup, bypass pumps, and the AMI towers. Any questions?
Yeah. So if they are forced to add those, if that development has to put in an AMI tower and has to put in a bypass pump, is the fee still higher?
Well, so the development wouldn't have to put in the AMI tower. The city's always going to put in the AMI tower, so they would have to pay those increased costs to the meter fees. But yes, if they were required to put in a odor control unit, they would still pay the increased sewer tap fee.
Okay, because like the one we toured, it was probably, 6 months ago, the one that we checked out, I don't think the tower was up yet. I think they were still putting it up. But so that one would have to pay the increased tap fee?
Yes.
Okay. And then, I remember asking this question before and you guys had an answer, I just don't remember what it was. Is it possible to put the AMI stuff on cell phone towers?
Not really. We were looking at kind of a different program a year ago where we could do something like that. But when we do these propagation studies, it's really kind of prescriptive of where the tower needs to go and what height it needs to be. So in order to reduce the total amount of towers, they have a pretty good idea of where it needs to go.
Okay, yeah, I just didn't know if we could lease space on a tower somewhere in an area of need, so, okay.
And Marjorie's going to talk about discussion item 3. Thank you.
So is it okay if we come back with that stuff?
Sure. Yes, I guess so.
Okay. So this discussion item, we did bring to you in individual briefings, and we wanted to bring forward to you as a group. And I'm sorry that Councilwoman Matheny is not here. But it's this is an outside the box, just for one-offs. This is not, we don't see these distributed wastewater units, all over the service area. But there is a need for a limited, number of some type of solution for these one-off situations. So it's a distributed wastewater treatment unit. It's like a little mini wastewater treatment plant, provides secondary treatment. It's permitted by DEP, it's monitored by SCADA and licensed FDEP operators. And the business model is that they actually become customers of St. Cloud Utilities, and they pay a flat wastewater fee. So it would require a modification of the Land Development Code, and it may require a modification to the comp plan, may or may not. So the one-offs are, where extending sewer to the site is impractical, the site is so isolated, or the septic tank is failing, it's near a water body, it's an individual home or business, and it's an interim solution or an alternative to a septic tank. So, and the term itself, what we have is a centralized wastewater plant, and this is just the opposite. It's distributed, so it's out in the field. So no need to pump out the drain field. There's no drain field replacement, and it provides nutrient treatment to protect surface waters. And the services are provided by the city, so they are our customers. They're not individual. They're not septic tank. They're not sole owners of the system. They're installed and maintained by the city or a contractor. Typically, realistically, they'd be installed by the homeowner or by a developer if they were developing a particular home or a site or a business. And after installation, the only cost to the homeowner is a flat monthly sewer bill. And they are eligible for grants. And we are in the Okeechobee BMAP, or Basin Management Action Plan area, which is a water, an area that is a sensitive water body area. And how does it work? It's not a next-generation septic tank. It's like a little mini wastewater treatment plant. It's been rigorously tested by DEP, and it surpasses the state standards. Nitrogen removal, it's 90%, which is really important. And if you know anything about septic tanks, that's much, much better than a septic tank. It's no risk of sewer overflows or clogging. And again, it's, as I already said, it's continuously monitored. So in engineerical terms, it's a sequencing batch reactor. Oh, I said it right without, it's kind of like the the seashell thing. I can't always say it. They can be sized to either treat individual units, houses, or to treat a subdivision, commercial, institutional, and each unit includes the list there. So they have 3 separate chambers, and they're designed to meet secondary standards, treatment limits, with enhanced nutrient removal. So this is a picture of, I can see that, so here is the outside of what one of them looks like, and then these are the 3 chambers. So the first chamber is for primary settling, and then the second is where the anaerobic and aerobic bacteria and some, and then the third would be the mixing and settling. And then when it leaves the third chamber, it's actually, and the clarifying, so that when it leaves the third chamber, it's actually very clear. There's no disinfection, so you don't want to drink it, but it could be used for drip irrigation. It could be used to be discharged into a constructed wetland. So it could be used, for irrigation as long as it doesn't have human contact.
I have a question. Is that sitting there in that guy's front yard like that?
No, it's installed underground.
Okay.
It's actually installed underground.
Be nice, lovely sight, wouldn't it?
Right.
So, we had a couple of situations that came up, and I said, okay, Brian, come back with, a structure. What would be a framework under which we would even be willing to consider something like this? And so this is the framework in which what he brought back. If we had a failing septic tank drain field within 200 feet of a water body, if we didn't have sanitary sewer available to the property, and it may require a future connection. In fact, we're going to require that they pay the impact fees at the time of connection. They have to apply, the customer would have to apply for this distributed wastewater treatment unit with a commitment to pay a monthly service fee. And that unit actually has to be permitted by DEP to the city. So it's not permitted to that person or that business, it's permitted to the city. So here's a few real-world examples, and these are in the year and a few months that I've been here. These are a few of the examples where it might be a good fit. There's a veterinary clinic in an unincorporated Osceola County that's in the urban growth boundary. And we're not anywhere near, we don't have any services nearby. And it would be 500 to 800,000 for that veterinary clinic to run a pipe to, bless you, to the site. And there is room to put one of these there. And then we could require that it be there, that they hook up within 5 years, 10 years after the, whatever it is we determine, from a policy standpoint or from a technical standpoint. The life cycle of this, we believe, is at least 10 years. And the capital cost is $10,000 to $15,000, so depending on the size, it could be more. So they could, and then as it grows, if we got a grant for it, I mean, this is a perfect example of where that could be a solution for them, and then they could open their veterinary clinic, because they don't allow septic tanks at all. And we can't run pipe. So there are also several places where there are very large lots with no access to sewer for a foreseeable future. There are also, Bill, where's the area that's, there's an underserved area?
In the River Road area?
The River Road area, where this might be a really good solution. So we're not talking about populating the whole city with these things. Just in those one-off areas. So this is a staff recommendation. So just allow these in limited circumstances as an option under the recommended criteria to resolve certain wastewater service problems on an individual case-by-case basis. Any questions?
Could a property owner purchase this and pay the full cost and just install it himself?
Could they?
I'm assuming they could they not? Or it had to be permitted, though, would it not?
It has to come through the city.
Yeah, it has to be permitted through DEP and monitored. My understanding, it has to be monitored through DEP or through a common system.
So in simplistic terms, it just looks like a 3-chamber septic tank instead of a 2, bigger, and then it still has a leach field, right, or something.
It has a
distribute.
drain field, or you could call it whatever you want to call it, but the drain field is only used for it doesn't have to be a drain field. It could be a pipe at the end, and you could pipe it to drip irrigation. It could be piped to the constructed wetlands. That, whatever that is at the end is only used for hydraulics. It's not used for treatment. So then in the case of a septic tank, the drain field is used for partial treatment.
Okay,
So it's still digesting when it's in the drain field.
okay. And the SCADA just tells levels, or it does testing to make sure that it's still functioning?
The SCADA will tell whether, it'll tell level, it has a sensor, it'll tell whether there's enough stuff in there for a batch for it to treat it and to add air for the batch to go to run.
Oh, so there's an air pump in there too okay. Okay, so then it's.
I think I have that right, yes.
Okay, so it treats it that way, okay.
For the
What's-
batch to run.
What's the approximate cost of constructing one of these?
Okay, my understanding, unless it's gone up, was it's between $10,000 and $15,000 for a house.
Okay, and then what do we think the maintenance will be, because the city's taking that on, right? So what do you think per year it'll be for that inspection?
So to have, if you contract with, and they said they might show up, so I don't know if they, if you contract through this particular vendor, then it would be $35 a month, and then whatever we need to tack on, which we would need to tack on something for administrative fees, and also if we needed to show up at the site.
Okay, so on-site, it looks like performance or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal for something expensive?
Okay, you got a question?
So, well, certainly that had to be evaluated, you know, the cost, but I certainly don't have a problem supporting the recommendation, certainly under limited circumstances.
Yeah.
It'd be very limited.
Yeah. What else you need?
I think that's it. Y'all have been very patient.
Well, you've done an excellent
There's a
job.
lot of slides.
And thank you for
Without
your
costume changes, that was a lot. Thank you.
presentation, Cameron. You did an excellent job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
City Manager.
Item number 5 has been removed from the agenda. We are at adjournment unless Mr. Sturgeon has something.
Yes, sir. Very quickly, Mayor, 2 items. First off, want to let the council know that we're going to be applying for the Resilient Florida grant. There's a couple infrastructure things that came through the additional money from the CARES Act and American Rescue Plan. So that has to be in by September 1st. So we're still evaluating projects eligible for that. Additionally, on August the 16th, the clerk sent you a letter, Mr. Morales passed away. We need to have somebody nominated or recruited by the city council to sit on the Joint Contract Administrative Committee with OUC and St. Cloud. So I request we look for somebody to sit on that board to replace Mr. Morales. God rest his soul.
Does it need to be somebody, it can't be a council member, it's got to be somebody outside, right? Because I'm on that board.
No, you already filled a position, and so it can't be another council member.
Right, can't be another council member, so it had to be somebody outside.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
That's it. Thank you, Mayor.
If you have any recommendations for someone to sit in that position, let us know. We're adjourned. We got a few minutes before DSD meeting.